I am currently working with the Human Rights Foundation as a writer, where I write the weekly Financial Freedom Report, which is a weekly newsletter that we send out, basically covering the intersection of Bitcoin and human rights, why Bitcoin is a tool for financial freedom. But we also cover all the ways that authoritarian regimes and dictators basically, manipulate money, debase currencies, freeze bank accounts, censor transactions, monitor donations, and a myriad of other forms of financial repression. To stifle political opposition, keep their population repressed and complacent, stifle democratic checks and balances by targeting independent media and things like that. But my journey into Bitcoin began much, much, much earlier on than joining HRF, and my sort of curiosity into solving some of the economic problems we saw in the world today actually started about a year into my economics degree. So I graduated last year with my bachelor's of economics. Um, and basically, I was about a year into my degree when I started kind of just generally questioning a lot of the things that I was seeing in the world and starting to sort of making those connections that perhaps some of the things that we were seeing, like inflation and wealth inequality and really high levels of debt, um, how could we build a system? How could we build an economic system that didn't have these problems? Because ultimately, I was looking at all these issues, and it was pretty clear to me that these were sort of stemming from the systems that we currently use. Um, and so I was, before even discovering Bitcoin, very much like looking for solutions to build a better economy that was more focused on us and the environment, and it was more fair, um, and didn't have all of these sort of like externalities that were just not working for most people. So I did a lot of study into like alternative economics and like new models and ways that we could like fix the system within the system, if you will. But it wasn't until I discovered Bitcoin that everything kind of clicked together. So it was about 2 years into my degree that I discovered Bitcoin during the COVID pandemic. And that sort of was the moment that everything clicked. I realized, that a global permissionless currency actually could address a lot of the imbalances that we were seeing in the economy today. So I fell down the rabbit hole 2 years into my degree. I went in head first. I think the first book I read was the Bitcoin Standards. So I skipped the whole shitcoin phase and went straight to Bitcoin only, which I'm very grateful for in the long run of things. Um, and I just started studying Bitcoin like a madman. Truly, I was just absolutely fascinated by the idea of it and what it could mean for the future, for people, for the environment, socially, and all these different implications for it. I would get off work and I would immediately get home. I would grab the Bitcoin Standard and I would go down to the park and just like read it religiously because I was just so overwhelmed by this new idea and this new technology. Um, and then after about 6 months of studying it, I decided to become president of my university's Bitcoin club, which I led for a couple years, um, alongside some really great people who helped me run that club at university. So we were kind of breaking Bitcoin into the academic scene. We were hosting both social and educational meetups. So we would do things like lightning workshops, learning about self custody, learning the basics of Bitcoin, blockchain, all of these things. Um, and that was a really awesome way to get to engage with the younger generations and engage with the academic side, which I think is something that is happening more now, but was not happening very much at the time. um, and so that was a really awesome experience. Getting to talk about Bitcoin with students is a really like enjoyable time because often they're much more open minded and ultimately they're younger. They're a digitally native generation for the most part. I can say myself, I grew up watching like the formation of the largest technological monopolies ever, the Googles, the Instagrams, the Facebooks of the world. I watched that all rise, right? So digital money is not a stretch for Gen Z by any means. So that was a very refreshing way to get to talk about Bitcoin, was talking about Bitcoin with Gen Z. Um, but eventually, I started writing about Bitcoin on my own blog, and just sort of posting that out into the wider internet, hoping that someone would read it. I got a decent amount of traction, enough that I made enough connections in the Bitcoin space that I ended up being offered an internship at the Human Rights Foundation, um, where I started helping on the content team, and then I joined them full time just over a year ago, and started writing the Financial Freedom Report as I mentioned before. So it's been a long but very rewarding journey. Bitcoin has completely changed the trajectory of my career in many ways, and the way I see the world. So I'm internally grateful, and yeah.
Really cool. And you are one of the few Gen Z guests I have. Like I think you're Gen Z, right? It's actually, I think there are a lot of, I don't know all the like generations, but I think millennials is like one ahead, and then there's boomers coming, baby boomers coming. I don't know if there's something in between. There's probably something in between that I miss now. Uh,
Gen X, yeah.
yeah, Gen X, yeah, like
they're literally the forgotten generation. That's the whole thing. So the fact that you forgot them is on point.
gosh, yeah. What Gen X is like? What is the age range there? Like 50 or like?
I Yeah, they would be somewhere in there now. Yeah, I believe my parents are Gen X and they're about 50, so that adds up.
Yeah, because it's so funny. That's the main audience here. It's like
Interesting. Hmm.
47 is, I think, the average, and Gen Z is very few. Like I have, I think YouTube shows it with 25 or under. That's like 2% of all
Yeah.
that listen to the podcast. I'm 26, so I'm also Gen Z, and for Gen Z hosts to have like just like 1% that are as old as him or younger, that's pretty weird for me, but it's nice also, because I learn a lot from from older guests, but also from my older audience. But how it's interesting because like there are not a lot of Gen Z Bitcoiners out there. First of all, like why do you think is that, and why do you think it's maybe even more important for Gen Z to get Bitcoin than it's for millennials or Gen Xers?
Yeah, I mean, that's an absolutely great question. It's important for Gen Z and really any generation following, whether that's Gen Alpha and unfortunately Generation Beta, which they're calling it. But basically, it's important because, like, in many ways, Bitcoin is about the future, right? Like, it's about it has an impact right now, and we see that. But I think its impact in terms of financial freedom, in terms of government accountability, in terms of the way it interacts with energy and things like that, all of these are sort of things that are going to play out more so on maybe on a decade long scale. So I think the people that stand to benefit the most from Bitcoin are all those in the future who get to see Bitcoin when it's been around for 30 or 40 years or 50 or 100 even, right? Like this is the money of the future. It's the money that, and it's a monetary system that we can actually use to properly serve the world, and build an economy from that actually works, that doesn't steal from you. Um, and I mean, yeah, so like it's a big part of my work, before I started really getting into the human rights side of Bitcoin, did focus on like Gen Z awareness of Bitcoin. So that was a big part of why I was doing the stuff I was doing at the club. In many ways, Gen Z has also received the short end of the stick in a lot of ways. That is to mean, most of my friends and peers have been priced out of owning a home because home ownership or home prices have risen so much faster than our incomes or wages, right? And this is an effect of the fiat monetary system, right? Um, and so in many ways, I see Bitcoin as a key to being able to obtain home ownership for Generation Z, because it provides a savings vessel that you can easily invest in. Um, and it is not going to be debased by inflation. One of the big problems is that people are just, they don't, a lot of people don't invest in the first place, right? But also a lot of people are just, holding money in a checking or savings account, and it's just being eaten away by inflation every single year. And it's not really conducive to being able to own assets in the future. And then on top of that too, just like the general cost of living has been so dramatically high, Another issue too is, everybody's going to university and they're coming out of university, and I know a ton of people that have just gone straight back to the job they had while they were working in university, or the job they had before. Just going back into their retail setting instead of actually being able to find opportunities with the degree that they pursued. Obviously, that is, to some degree depends on which topic of or area of study you choose. But these are all observations that I'm seeing with my peers, and really just as a more general trend around people my age range. So it's incredibly important for Gen Z to get involved in Bitcoin. Like, I think Gen Z and the generations after it have the most to benefit from Bitcoin. Right now, a lot of people just think about it as an investment, but I truly do believe that Bitcoin will transform the world for the better in so many different ways. And so obviously the people that are young and have lots of life ahead of them have the most to benefit from Bitcoin's rise to global reserve currency. So people like you and I, and many other people our age, there are a few Gen Z Bitcoiners as well. There's a growing number. I've noticed. I'm pretty active on X, and I'm seeing a lot of like some like Gen Z reveals of people coming out and being like, "Yep, I'm a Bitcoiner. I'm here to like help Gen Z out." No doubt, in part because of the help of both Ella Huff and Arsh Malou, who run the Bitcoin Student Network, which is a global hub for Bitcoin clubs and at universities to connect together and share practices and resources. And so those two people have done an incredible job of like providing a space for Gen Z in Bitcoin, and putting in the work to build those things. So huge shout out to Ella and Arsh, and the work that they're doing as well. So, but so what I'm trying to say is, Gen Z has a lot to benefit from Bitcoin, and of course, there are a growing number of us involved in the space, like you and I.
And it's fascinating for me that there is student connections and Bitcoin clubs in universities and all those things, because we don't see a lot of academia being into Bitcoin. And those Bitcoin clubs, those Bitcoin student connections can actually help making sure that the next generation of academia actually is in Bitcoin, and the next generation of academia are Bitcoiners, and we can actually change science to a certain degree.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's all about awareness, right? Like you can't understand, you can't use something if you don't understand how to use it. I mean, you can't opt out of a broken system unless you know that there's another alternative, right? So most people have never thought about money in their life. I mean, they think about money every single day, but they've never actually questioned the money that we use. Um, and especially, Gen Z, like, it's just kind of been given, like, government issued paper is what we just consider money. And before Bitcoin, it never even crossed my mind that we could have something else as money. I mean, obviously everyone kind of has that antiquated idea of gold being money in the past, but truly, like, it's sort of this weird realization when you first get into Bitcoin. You're like, wait, other things could just be money. Like any good could technically be money. It just depends on the properties that it has, whether or not it's good money or bad money. And of course, aligning yourself with the good money versus the bad money is how you can get ahead. And aligning yourself with economic reality is a very important thing to do. And so, yeah, I mean, like, thinking back to fiat money, and I mean, it's just it's not a fair system. So we need to kind of just like question it more, and like actually question the money that we use. And I think we owe it to ourselves and future generations to do so, right? To push forward and to kind of challenge that status quo.
Yeah, and this is a really important thing that you just said. Like like I don't think that if you just adopt the Bitcoin standard, you will win, and if you are staying on the fiat standard, you lose. But I think you have a way better chance of winning, whatever winning means to you, winning in life when you are on a Bitcoin standard versus when you are on a fiat standard. It's the same thing. Like if you are on a Bitcoin standard, you are you're walking on normal ground that you can actually run on, walk on normally. And fiat, you're kind of like in this mud that kind of drags you down. You can still walk, but like it drags you down a little bit. And depending on if you use Turkish lira or like the Argentine peso, it drags you down a lot more than if you use the euro or the dollar or something like that, but it drags you down no matter what. So doesn't mean you cannot get forward, but it's just way harder to get forward in a fiat standard versus in a Bitcoin standard. That's the best kind of analogy that I get to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it like I often use the treadmill example, right? Like on the fiat standard, you're on a treadmill that's running against you, and you're trying to keep up. And the best you can do is really just stay still, stay standing still, stay in that same spot on the treadmill. Whereas with Bitcoin and aligning yourself with Bitcoin and adopting a Bitcoin standard in your life can help you get ahead because your savings don't depreciate; they appreciate, which is just like savings is the foundation for all future investment as well, right? So and what you can do with your savings is start a business or start whatever you desire, you can then pursue when you actually have adequate savings and you have a technology that allows you to not necessarily get ahead, but just like actually, like you said, walk normally or run normally. It just provides a stable foundation that you can actually build off instead of building on a foundation that's constantly sinking lower.
I also like the thing that you said in the beginning where you said like you kind of realized you first kind of wanted to fix the system within the system, and you kind of see like, okay, how can we improve the fiat system? And I see a lot of academia actually doing that. I think a lot of academia is like, oh, there's this fiat system, we cannot get out of that.
Mhm.
How can we make it more fair? How can we make this whole thing better? And you're like, you can try, but you probably won't succeed. And that's a hard thing to overcome when you learn the system in the university, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, a part of the reason people are like actively seeking for solutions within the system we currently have is because they don't realize there is actually an alternative out there. They don't necessarily fully understand that Bitcoin is that alternative, that there is another option, an option that isn't just a replacement for the money we use, but also for all of the financial institutions and intermediaries and middlemen within it, right? Bitcoin is a currency. Well, it's money, but it's also a monetary system, right? It's a means to save and transact with a unit that can't be censored or debased. So they don't necessarily understand that full picture yet. That Bitcoin is actually a systemic alternative to fiat, and so they are still, locked in that box, the fiat box, the debt-based monetary system that constantly that requires the perpetual expansion of credit to continue functioning. Um, and so they search for solutions within it. And I did the same thing, and I get it. And that's a natural place to go if you are trying to find solutions and fix some of the problems that we're looking at today. But ultimately, I don't think it will get you very far in the grand scheme of things. Like these, I strongly do believe that many of the financial problems we're looking at today, especially when it comes to like debt levels and inflation, these are not problems that can be fixed within the system we are currently in. They require a new solution. They require kind of rebuilding a parallel system from the ground up. And that's what we're doing with Bitcoin, right? So
How do you think this adoption will go forward? If you think about like how Bitcoin is kind of now getting more and more adopted with the corporate adoption, but also like states are kind of looking at it, it's like slowly. Is the main thing of like, let's get Bitcoin adopted and integrated in the traditional financial space, and then in the long run, it kind of replaces the traditional financial space slowly.
yeah, I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, so I think it can play out in many different ways, and I am not sure which one. But to your point, I think we are witnessing a little bit of what you're seeing there. Um, Bitcoin kind of like being integrated into existing financial infrastructure around the world. In the states, whether that's ETFs and all these treasury companies, and also just normal companies, and nation states adopting it, but also on like a localized level, around the world. Those who are kind of living more on the margins of the financial system, people, for example, in Kenya. I don't know if you've heard of Tando before, but it's basically someone has plugged Bitcoin and the Lightning Network into M-Pesa. M-Pesa is a mobile money network used across Africa for sending and receiving transactions. It's like very very commonly used, perhaps it's like that and cash are basically how they transact. And so by plugging in Bitcoin and Lightning into M-Pesa, they've allowed people to spend Bitcoin for goods and services in Kenya, using financial infrastructure that already existed. So plugging Bitcoin into TradFi in a way, to expand its use case and to expand its accessibility. And it's working, right? There are, like, in Kibera, which is um, a community in Kenya, there's over 200 merchants using this software to spend and receive Bitcoin. But they're not the only ones. There are other applications. In Brazil, for example, they have something called Pix, which is a mobile money system that over 75% of the Brazilian population uses. It's very similar to M-Pesa in the sense that, it's just like an app on your phone that you use to send and receive transactions. I believe it's also QR code based, similar to Bitcoin. And so someone has plugged in Bitcoin into the Pix system so that you can scan a Pix QR code and then pay with Bitcoin from your Lightning wallet, right? And so these are really cool examples of plugging Bitcoin into existing financial infrastructure to expand its accessibility for people that are also, like, very much on the margins of the financial system, who are fighting against, as you said, much worse inflation than what we have right now in North America, who are also dealing with, inadequate access to banking services and banking accounts, and also dealing with governments and central banks that are much more financially repressive. So they're probably surveilling transactions more. They might be flagging and censoring transactions more. So kind of having these workaround solutions that are just open source and plugging into other parts of the financial system are really cool. And I think that's one of the ways that Bitcoin adoption is going to spread most rapidly, and specifically spreading most rapidly where people need it most, right? Like, I spend a lot of time pushing back against, the idea that Bitcoin is an investment. I think that is an idea that really only has emerged, like, in North America, in more privileged countries, ultimately, because we have financial privilege. We live. There's plenty of people that live. If you live in the States, or you live in Canada, or you're living in many European countries, you live in a democracy with a relatively stable currency and functioning legal systems. Where you have access to banking services and a bank account, and you can free speech is pretty good as well. You can pretty much say whatever you want, um, to varying degrees around the world. But when you look on the periphery, when you look on the margins of the financial system, you look at places like Cuba or Nigeria or Venezuela or Russia or China, where inflation is a lot higher, and where financial control is a much more ingrained aspect of life. Those are the places where I see Bitcoin adoption growing the most rapidly.
Thank you for watching this video. This was only a snippet of the podcast. And if you want to watch the full episode and get all of the context of this episode, you can click right here or here. Oh, maybe also here.